Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, November 5th, and what's going on out there? What do you want to start with?
All kinds of things are going on out there. Well, maybe I'll just start with a little something. This is, we've talked about, a lot of people have talked about it, this incident of the Black Hawk helicopters. And I just wanted to add a little something to it. Again, to repeat, nobody seems to be sure how many helicopters actually were involved. And maybe there were two, maybe there were three. Apparently, at least one was destroyed. Then we have video footage of an entire crew, of special forces, basically, GUR, which is Ukrainian Military Intelligence Special Forces, being destroyed after disembarking from one of these helicopters. We know where they landed. They landed in a kill zone. That's just crazy. In a kill zone, obviously, I think we all know what that means. And so not surprisingly, they were killed and killed very quickly. So what's going on? The idea that they were actually trying to turn the tide of the battle just seems so ridiculous, because we're talking about hundreds, thousands of soldiers. What would 20 soldiers, let's say if there were two helicopters that transferred these special forces, what would they do? Obviously, they just wouldn't have any impact on the battle, and they're landing in a kill zone. So the most popular theory is that they were trying to extract somebody at a high-value target. One other theory that I think I have to mention that I've heard out there is that they were going to plant a flag and to demonstrate that Ukraine still held on to Pokrovsk. Now, that just sounds so absurd, but I mean, again, the Ukrainians have gone to such extraordinary lengths, to lie about this, that it might even be true. I don't think we can entirely, eliminate that possibility. Still, I think the most likely thing is that they were trying to extract a high value target. So anyway, I find that very interesting. And I know like Larry Johnson and others have speculated that it would probably a foreign high value target, like CIA, for example. And again, that does make some sense. Why would you do that, make such a risky move? Well, perhaps you're getting basically orders from on high, get our guy out of there. And they tried and they failed. Now, they landed in this kill zone close to Russian-controlled territory. And when they started running, they were actually running into Russian-controlled territory. So if in fact this is true and they were trying to get this high-value target, he would have to be somewhere within Russian-controlled territory, probably hiding in a basement somewhere. And I think that the Russians probably were looking at that, saying, hey, who's he trying to get? Where is he? They may very well have found him by now. I think that's quite possible. They may have him if that's what was going on. And I think that's the most likely explanation. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I just thought that it's kind of a fascinating little, let's say, subplot to the larger Pokrovsk, drama.
Do you think we'll get some validation on that theory soon? I mean, if they captured him, will they release it and let it be known that, hey, we have proof that the U.S., the CIA itself, or whatever it is directly involved here?
It's certainly possible. Who knows what goes on behind the scenes about these kind of things. Or they may just use them to make some kind of behind the scenes deal with the Americans. The Americans have one of their guys and they're going to release them, or who knows, all of these things are possible. So it may go public, it may not, if in fact that's what happened.
If it goes public, do you think it'll have any repercussions on the war, or does it really actually change the attitudes of people?
I don't think so. But I do think, I guess to continue from where we were from the last episode, that Zelensky, the Ukrainian regime's lies about what's going on in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. I think that this is, like I think I said last time, a watershed moment. It seems to be an eye-opening moment for a lot of Ukrainians. Just the extent of mendacity, of their government. They're just lying about everything. And I think, by and large, they've trusted government. Government propaganda has really shaped their consciousness. But the lies are so obvious, they're getting so ridiculous that there's just a lot of mockery about it online, among the Ukrainians. And it's extraordinary. I think just yesterday that Zelensky said that Kupiansk had been recaptured by by the Ukrainians, which is just completely absurd. Nothing like that is going on. In the past, it was sort of like, okay, they kind of pretended that a town or city wasn't falling. They sort of, and you see this with the deep state mapping project, which has been brought under, tight government control there. They actually show, if you look at it, you can see the Russian advance over time, but everything is delayed by a month or something. Sort of like they're in a month in the past. And that's the way their lying used to work. This time it's become just absurd. They've gone beyond saying things like Kupiansk is recaptured. They've claimed that there have been counterattacks or counteroffensives that just have never occurred. They've described battles that are just entirely fictional. And so this, I think, it's on one level, it certainly shows a growing desperation, but also maybe just growing delusion among the leaders, Zelensky in particular, and Syrskyi, his chief military officer, and it just doesn't bode well for the future of the Ukrainian regime.
Is he on shakier ground now that this lying is becoming so apparent to even the Ukrainian people that his stranglehold on power, is it going to be weakened from this?
Well, that's, it's a good question. And, we discussed it last time. And I said that it seems clear, at this point, again, that Zelensky has a very firm control on power. That's something he's been working on ever since he became president. And now there really is no opposition whatsoever. At first, if you go back to 2019, when he was elected, he started off by suppressing opposition parties. And so eventually there just was no opposition whatsoever. They were all suppressed. Their leaders were arrested for treason and also opposition media outlets or outlets, that weren't completely towing the government line. So he's got complete control over the official information space. And you look at there is no opposition political party. And then more recently, after he got rid of all of the opposition political parties, he started to go after factions even within his party, people that weren't entirely loyal. They were part of his party, part of the Maidan revolution, but he suspected their loyalty, and he's gone after all those people. So now there really isn't. There's just nobody around who might oppose him. But he has to worry about the military, and I think that's the main concern. Now, there's a lot of speculation that Syrskyi might go because of this, the upcoming or the disaster in the making here in Pokrovsk. And the thing is, well, yeah, he's very unpopular, so the thinking goes, the argument goes. So therefore, Zelensky will have to get rid of him and replace him with somebody who's more popular. Now, that may happen, but it may be that actually Syrskyi, his unpopularity is what will keep him in his office. Again, it's just that Zelensky fears real opposition, especially within the military. So, and I remember at the time, Zelensky was actually quite a bit more popular among military men than among the soldiers than Syrskyi was. But Zelensky was booted out. He's basically in exile in London, and he was replaced by the unpopular Syrskyi. So I think he might just hold on to him. It may be that he'll just that there'll be such anger that he's going to have to get rid of him. He's going to make a scapegoat of him. But I'm sure he would be very reluctant to do that. It was actually the unpopularity of Syrskyi which is attractive to Zelensky. he doesn't want to have a very popular leader. That's why Zelensky went. Now, the guy that they're talking about as a replacement is an Azov guy, Beletsky. And again, he's much more popular among the soldiers. And there's probably pressure for Zelensky to do that. But I think Zelensky is going to resist it. He may in the end be forced to do it because the anger is just so great that he simply has to get rid of Syrskyi. But he'll be very reluctant to go with somebody like Beletsky.
Is there any hope for the Ukrainian people to end their suffering? And because they've gone through so much now, the Ukrainians, we've seen so many videos of the forced conscription. On Judge Napolitano the other day, there was a video of a young man in his early 20s just, crying, saying, I don't want to die. I don't want to, why are we going? It's very heartbreaking. This is happening to hundreds of thousands of men. Who knows how many have died now already,
right.
In a war they don't want to fight. And it's scary. And there's a lot of videos that just came out just the other day showing some, I don't know if some were soldiers, some were civilians. One of them was an elderly woman crossing over to the Russian side, and you could see a Ukrainian drone, fly right in front of her and just watching her. And she gets down on her knees and starts praying, does the sign of the cross over and over repeatedly. Yeah. And the drone just toys with her for like a minute and then just rams it right into her face and blows her up. And I saw this as well with two men, same thing. A drone came in, they're waving a white flag, and then the drone hits him. And then his buddy comes over, starts doing the sign of the cross, praying again. Another drone toys it. And you just see this. And, this is just a microcosm that we're seeing, what gets captured to these people. It's so horrible. I've seen footages of somebody just walking down the road, with like a flag, just wanting to just get out of the war. They don't want to die. They don't want to kill people. Someone comes out of the woods and just shoots them right in the head. A Ukrainian soldier just, like we talked before, like why they don't surrender.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, these videos are numerous and they've been around for a long time. It's clearly something that the Ukrainians, the fanatics, the ultranationalists have been doing, and that's why we've seen so few surrenders. It's horrifying. I think the woman you talked about was in Kupiansk, if I remember correctly. But yeah, both civilians and soldiers are just regularly killed by these people if they see them going to the other side, in particular, going over to the Russians.
Yeah.
And, like the only positive statistic that I can mention, for these Ukrainians, who don't want to die in the war is the very high desertion rate. That, apparently something like 20, they conscript 30,000 a month, or they try to, but 20,000 desert is something. No, that's not exact, but roughly that's what's happening, according to the Ukraine's own figures. And in the last 12 months, something like over 200,000, 290,000 men have deserted, or maybe it's 200,000. It's at least 200,000. So the only, that gives me a little bit of comfort when I see these guys that are grabbed on the streets. Some of them, or 2/3 of them, apparently run away and maybe get out of the country, or they get back home or to some safe place, some friend's house somewhere, and hide in the basement. But it's terrifying. It's really awful. I agree.
Yeah, it's scary to see how quickly people can lose their humanity in war. We've seen it both in Ukraine and in Israel. And prior to the war, probably most people just think like, how can somebody be okay with this? The mass killing of children in Gaza, a drone operator just looking at elderly women and then driving a drone right into her face while she's praying.
Right.
The attacks on civilians, these types of things. I think it's just a warning, I think, to all of us as tensions are growing throughout the West here, that any country can descend into this type of madness potentially, and I hope we don't go there, but it needs to spread, because war just starts to breed this inhumanity where you just can be okay with such horrific acts. I'm a bit worried of the spreading. And once somebody has done this type of act so long and becomes normalized, Can he bottle it back up? We've talked about
Yeah.
that with Israel. How do we handle Israeli
Right.
society if people are protesting the right to kill and rape Palestinians, and if the Banderites just have this ideology that ethnic Russians are subhuman, and they call them orcs, and they're okay with blowing up old ladies? It's a
Yeah.
scary
No,
world we live in.
it's right. No, you have to say, yeah, that Ukrainian society has undergone a transformation. If when they shortly after the coup took place in 2014, the insurrections followed in eastern Ukraine, and these were not Russian instigated or anything. There's just no evidence. This was quite spontaneous, and for obvious reasons. Like the very first act of the new Rada was to suppress the Russian language. And so anyway, they could see, the people in the East, what was coming, what this was all about. So we had these insurrections. And then shortly after that, the new government declared an anti-terrorist operation, the ATO, and, ordered the army to start to fire on the insurrectionists. And what they found is that much of the army would not do that. They said, these are our fellow Ukrainians. We can't do this. So they were very reluctant. And that's when, once again, the ultranationalists, they stepped in. Like back then, it was called the Azov Battalion. But of course, there are many, many other. There's something broader Azov family, that many different militias. And those kind of ultranationalists were the ones that were willing to fire on their fellow Ukrainians. In fact, seemed to be eager to do it. And so this new government came to rely on them. Because they were the ones that could actually, implement their policies, that would fight the war for them. And then we're seeing that that has continued throughout. It's just like right now, again, we're looking at the incompetence of Sersky. He's not one of these ultranationalists. He was born and raised in Russia, though some of those ultranationalists do have this background. So that doesn't prove he's not an ultranationalist. But he's not a Banderite. He's not part of that group. But the most competent, effective fighting forces are the ultranationalists. And so that's why they're, looking at the possibility of Beletsky, Andrei Beletsky. Because, again, these are the ones that can get the job done. So this is a very strange, we started off with a Ukraine where you had soldiers who would not fire on their fellow Ukrainians. And now we have this Ukraine. It's a Ukraine that has really undergone transformation. Again, it was these deals with the devil were made back in 2014, between the liberals, really, the Western-oriented liberals and these ultranationalists. And it's grown. And now to the point where, the liberals actually see them as heroes. This is what I've been reading, is that many of the liberals, actually favor the national ultranationalists over the government mainstream forces, let's call them. And that's very worrying. Then there's this larger question. This is something that I brought up before. The political scientist Richard Sakwa calls it the Ukrainization of Europe and European politics. That we see this transformation within Ukraine. It's gone quite far. Very frightening transformation in the direction of these Banderite ultranationalists. But that seems to be spilling over to some extent, where you get increased militarization and historical revisionism, et cetera, within Europe at large. Now, because again, these people really are neo-Nazis or even Nazis. I mean, some of them actually have direct links to the Nazis in a way that you don't find anywhere else in the world. Certainly not in America. Again, we'll call them Banderites because it's not exactly, but they obviously have an affinity for Nazism. They display the symbols and they share some of the ideology. They've made adjustments. It's a particular local flavor of it. But here they are. These are extremists. These are the people that you think that like the European Union would hate the most. This is what the EU is supposed to be, should be the anti-Banderite union, right? But it hasn't been. They've decided to look away. And, You say, well, okay, well, what's going on here? I think some of them, a lot of them know what's going on, and they think, well, we're just going to use these people. And maybe that's how the liberals, especially initially within Ukraine, thought we'll just use them. And then when they do a deed, we'll cast them aside. And you can find some historical precedents for things like that. Let's say this is different, but in World War II, we're allied with Stalinist Russia. And during those war years, all the propaganda, anti-Soviet propaganda was toned way down, and they were our friends and allies, and they were great. The government was friendly with ours, and but then they became enemies again afterwards. Could this happen? It could, but I wonder. I'm not sure. Because you just see what's happening. But I guess part of the reason that I'm not sure is just that the Europeans just themselves. The people are apathetic. Okay, they do have this supposedly, human rights ideology, something, but they don't really seem to believe in it. And there's just this decrepitude, this sort of like the sense like they are, okay, they're mouthing these slogans, but they don't have the passion. They don't really believe in it. But then when you look at the ultranationalists, they do really believe in what they believe. And you can say, okay, they're a tiny group compared to all of Europe, but it's a very passionate, a disciplined group can really transform a society. They've already done it to a great extent within Ukraine. And will it continue? Like, even if the Russians win, and they go all the way to Odessa, will that rump Ukraine that remains, will that just become a hotbed of banderism, which will infect the rest of Europe? I don't know, but I think it's something to worry about.
Yeah, I agree. I just feel like the longer this war goes on, the further we descend into darkness and this poison spreads. And it'll get to a point where I don't know if it can end without just some massive war, some massive bloodletting. That's my fear. Do you think that's a real risk that because killing and war breeds more killing and
Yeah.
war?
Right.
And it's gone on 3 years, and it's just like, I just don't see... I just don't see it ending. I mean, really, for the people in the Donbass, it's been going on since 2014. It's been going on for 11 years for some of these people.
Well, it certainly could end, like wars in the past have ended. It may be an ending somewhat similar to the First World War, which is actually not very comforting, because many of us understand that that's what set the stage for the Second World War. It was like the fundamental issues were not resolved, and then it all began again. And that's something that we might see. That's what I worry about. If we don't have, that's what I think one reason why, like, Putin is so eager to look for a political settlement and willing to even make some compromises to get that, because he understands that just a ceasefire, eventually, or a freezing of the conflict, which they just, may happen at some point when Russia feels like they've gone as far as they need to go. That's not a real settlement. You haven't really put out the fire, and it can blaze up again sometime in the future.
Right, but a political settlement is just always rejected by the Ukraine and the West. So it's not. You don't see it happening to you. Do you think that this will?
No, I don't. Yeah, I guess that's the thing with I've depended Putin for not escalating rapidly. Even when it seems like a lot of people said that he needed to, and in order to establish deterrence. But he does seem, to have this hope, that just won't die, that he can achieve a political settlement with the Western states, with the collective West. I just don't think so. I mean, it's just like they have a record of not honoring any of these things. So say, okay, yeah, we'll agree to, for example, denazification or demilitarization, and then they'll break it a year later after the ceasefire is achieved. I think there's just no reason to believe that they won't. They just haven't shown themselves to have any real sense of honor when it comes to these things.
Right. We started these conversations over a year ago, and we started them because I really just wanted to understand what was going on. The world was getting crazier and more dangerous, wars popping up all over the place. But the more we talk about these wars, I feel like I'm getting dragged into it as well, at least on the information war. And I don't know if this is the right thing I should be doing. Should I be participating in this war? Or am I choosing to be political? Or you know what I mean? Because I don't want to, I get angry when I hear about what happens, especially when I see what's going on in Gaza. I see what the Zionists, the control in our government, and I see these videos of people in Ukraine getting blown up. But I don't want to stoke hate. I don't want to hurt anybody. How do we tread this line? Just as, should we think of ourselves in a war that we are in an information war, and I need to just gear up because people will come after me because I'm just trying to have a discussion with my dad and figure out what's going on. And then if you're saying that it's a war, then we're saying, okay, well, there's no mercy, right? I have to go after the other side. Do I choose? You kind of know what I'm saying? Netanyahu says that they're fighting 8 fronts now, right? The 8th front, the information war.
Right.
Like, am I in this battle?
Well, in a way you are. Again, I think you have to say that we should always be truthful. None of us are perfect. We all have our biases. No human being is completely objective, but we can work at being objective. We can work at being truthful. And and if we are trying to cleave as close to the truth as possible, then we're doing good work. I think that's I think that should be self-evident. We want the truth to win. And I think, in this case, like in these two wars, by and large, especially in the case of Gaza, that our government has put itself on the wrong side. And so, we are firmly opposed to what they're doing. And we oppose them by shining a light on what's really going on.
Right. I guess an argument that some people would make, or maybe a position a lot of people that are wanting to stay out of this conversation, is that because we are upsetting the status quo, the system, and then that can breed chaos, right? Do you want to descend into a state of nature where it's pure chaos, or is it better to say, things are horrible, bad, but the alternative is even worse? I think that's the argument that a lot of people might make or rationalize. Is there any truth to that? Obviously, I'm not going to stop. We're not going to stop talking about this.
Right.
I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here a little bit here, because I also see some dangers of the information war, because I get emotional, I get invested in these stories. It can escalate, because I see things people will say something, and I just get, people get angry online, and it spills over, and
Yeah. Well. Yeah, as far as it getting emotional, whatever, it's, we need to be as cool as, let's say, be as calm and rational as possible. Yeah, emotion can be the enemy of rational analysis, and it can be the enemy of truth. But if we don't feel any emotion, there's something wrong too, especially in the case, because, many people are dying. This is not just an academic question. It is, a very, we're talking about the fates of millions of people, and if possibly, there's always the specter of a third world war. So to say that, we have to have emotion, I guess we just have to constantly stop. We can't do it all the time, but at least, periodically you have to stop and reflect and make sure that, that your emotions haven't actually warped your analysis and made you blind to some truths, because this can happen. You can certainly, we certainly see it on the other side. It could happen on our side too. There's that. And then the whole status quo argument. Yes, the status quo always has this advantage, just like people prefer the devil they know to the devil they don't. It just, if you talk about if things are still okay and you're getting by and you're relatively comfortable, you don't want to rock the boat. I mean, that's people's natural instinct, and they just kind of, when they see somebody rocking the boat, many people just have a kind of a visceral reaction to that. I would just say that we understand that the status quo is actually become profoundly destabilizing. It is taking us to the verge of World War III. It is supporting a genocide. And these are things that just, we could just choose to ignore them, but they're going to have consequences. And, they are having consequences now, first of all, huge consequences. It's not just a potential, but I think, again, it'll have consequences for our own system. and they won't be pleasant. And it's actually better to address these things sooner rather than later. The longer you put them off, I think the greater the crash is going to be. I think there's going to be some kind of crash. But if you have, at least if you simply, let's say, like in the case of Gaza or whatever, and you just let the Zionists have their way, and anybody who criticizes is tagged a radical, evil anti-Semite, and so on and so forth. In the end, they can't actually hide the truth. And when it comes out, it's going to be all the more, let's say, revolutionary, radical, extreme in one form or another. It's actually better, to start earlier, to begin when you can still talk, at least potentially, and debate, rather than wait for the bullets to fly. And then let's say the truth is the truth, and you need to get it out there the best you can. If the system's going to fall apart, we want to have some sort of understanding out there, like, okay, where did we go wrong, so that we can rebuild. If there's just no understanding, we're going to enter into a period of dark ages. I don't know if that's a very comforting answer, but
yeah,
I guess that's the way I look at it. I think, we just have a duty to say the truth as we see it, and we have a duty to reflect, to know that we are capable of error, and we can be blinded by our emotions, but we have a duty to do it. In the end, it's good. It's needed. It's needed in these times.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's incredible to think that we're living right now in a society where the other side, let's say the Zionists, the globalists, they're trying to ostracize people from polite society for objecting to what looks a lot like a genocide to most of us. And that's just so crazy. You're talking about the devil we know is better than the devil we don't, but the devil we know has really shown its colors. It's like, how did we get to this point where they're trying to gaslight us on why it's good that we're blowing up kids in Gaza? This is good for Western civilization. This is nuts. This is nuts.
Well, you think, like, if people had been brave back in the late 1960s, again, when the USS Liberty incident occurred. If our president had been brave, he knew what happened. He was angry. He was initially going to expose them, but he was frightened, by people who said, we'll tag you we're going to smear you as an anti-Semite if you go down this road. Again, major donors, we kind of see the beginning of the Israel lobby back then. It was real. But if he had been brave and others had been brave, that, we would not be where we are now. It's because of cowardice, of people who are afraid to rock the boat, to say the truth, to unleash some, real serious social conflict. That now it's much, 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 much worse. It should have been, it was the cowardice back then that brought us to where we are now. And it's only going to get worse. We are, it's a late hour now, but I think we need to shout as loud as we can about this.
Yeah, I guess what's depressing for me is just the level of immorality amongst our politicians, amongst so many people. I thought this was reserved for the serial killer psychopaths that they make a Netflix documentary about, but it seems so prevalent. I didn't know that there would be so many people that I guess they all get brought to the top. I guess it's money and power that's just corrupted so many people, but that's not I'd like to think that's not the natural state of things. Or, we were talking about in the beginning about these civilians that are being hit by these drones in Ukraine. It's like, I just didn't think that there'd be so many people that are just okay with that could go to bed at night, that can, it scares me to think that there's so much evil in the world. I didn't see it. Maybe it's always been there and it's been suppressed and now it's bubbled in the top, or it's just we're in this weird phase. I mean, I've heard about it historically, like when the Japanese and the rape of Nanjing, how they just said they were just basically kind of people. I heard people recounting that they were just like, seeing red and they were almost possessed, like, and it was like a fever dream almost, like when these things were going on. And I don't know if that's scary. We need to bottle that up. We need to tamp that down. I don't want that to spread.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Do you think that the world's always been this much immorality in the world?
We're a fallen race, the human race, and always had always capable of evil. It's always been, and that's the importance of civilization. It's just establishing norms and keeping us on the straight and narrow, because our left to our natural tendencies, I don't know that we, eventually quickly go to murder or anything, but we are vulnerable to it and always have been. Yeah, right. Well, what can I say? And okay.
Well, let me ask you a little something. Like, we're saying what we believe to be true. We're having these discussions and just being very honest and authentic about our feelings with them. The other side, though, they will say that, we're dangerous or whatever. What is the danger that they're presenting? Like, and is there any validity to it? I mean, I understand the anti-Semitism charge kind of thing. The one thing I would just say is like, I don't want people just to label all Jews as bad. Like this is something that we got to be careful about. I understand that fear. If I was but if you're a Jewish person, you want to be speaking out against like Max Blumenthal. I understand, but
yeah.
Anyways, do you think there's a danger that what are they presenting? What are they saying? Like, is there any validity to what they're saying? That speaking the truth is like.
Yeah, well, I think the reason that I am where I am is that I think that they have essentially embraced falsehood. It is a lie about what's happening in Ukraine, a lie about what's happening in Palestine. And they, I'm not God. I can't see into their souls. I don't know, what caused them to embrace this lie. It could be that they are fundamentally good people, that they have simply been deceived. And I'm sure that's the truth, especially just when you're talking about average people within the country that maybe fly an Israeli flag or whatever. They just have believed it. And if they actually saw with their own eyes, they would be horrified because they are decent people. So I don't want to judge them. But other people, I think to varying degrees, yeah, they've embraced this lie, and but they know it's a lie to some extent. It's just that they have chosen, the side of genocide. They have chosen to ally themselves with the Banderites, and it's hard to know. Again, it's just like in each individual case, where a person is. But again, it's just I have come to take this position, just based on my understanding, looking at all the evidence. And I am proud to be part of this, let's say dissident geopolitical community. It's not like we're incapable of error. From time to time, I think we sometimes hop on some bandwagon that's maybe not actually entirely true. We make mistakes. But I think by and large, we're on the side of the truth. That this is, we are a fact-based, by and large, a fact-based community, and the other side has, they've entered this this delusion. Now it's something you can actually see it happen to them, like in the case of Ukraine, but going back, especially even after the coup, all the way up until 2022, there was an awareness of this problem of ultranationalism and banderism within Ukraine, and it did come out. And now, you can see people go through the stage of, they have some kind of awareness that this is a problem. And then they seem to make a decision. I don't know if it's a conscious decision or it's just emotion, but then they let it go. They become blind to it when the problem is actually becoming much worse. They have put themselves on the wrong side. They have for emotional reasons, they've made an emotional investment in a side that is committing, that is actually, you know, you is Banderite, is quasi-Nazi or something, um, and so they made huge compromises with the truth. It's the only way they can hold their worldview together.
Well, if you say these wars, if Israel and Ukraine, they're built on falsehoods, then I'd like to think that the truth always wins. Is that true, or is that a naive little view of the world? That can't, I mean, if you're building something on a falsehood, it just has to crumble. You can have short victories, but it can never last, right?
Yeah, I think in the long run, that any civilization that is going to last and last for centuries has to be based, by and large, it's on the truth. Has to have, let's say, at least a correct understanding of human nature. Otherwise it can't survive from generation to generation. And I believe in just very recent generations that our leadership, the Western hegemonic world has actually, has gone down a road that's not sustainable. These lies, and we can see it like in these really self-destructive acts, particularly in Europe, it seems to be most advanced. They are doing themselves in, it's not like, in the end, it's probably, it's going to be that they are doing themselves in because they have, again, just have bought into a lie and have decided to build their so-called civilization on falsehoods.
I mean, then if it's being built on falsehoods, then we could say that really Israel was doomed from the start then, if it was built on a falsehood, right? The only way that maybe potentially it could have succeeded is if they recognized the sins of the Nakba and said, this was wrong. We need to give equal rights to Christians, to Muslims, and to Jews, that this is a land for everybody where we're treated equally. It's not an ethno-supremacist state. That's maybe the only way that they could have done if you recognize the sins of the past. Yeah. If you refuse to, then it's just you're doomed, right?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that. I think that with the delusion, I'd like to say that an ethno-supremacist state can't survive, but I think it can actually. But I think Israel is doomed, not so much just that it's ethno-supremacist, but that increasingly it has come to believe that it's, that their ethno-supremacism is truly divine and is, therefore they can throw caution to the winds. That's what we're seeing, is that they used to be careful about the kind of face that they presented to the world. They proceeded more cautiously. They were, ethnic cleansing was conducted over all those decades, even when it was these very secular powers were in charge. They let it happen. They were complicit in it, but they were cautious, and they knew that they couldn't go too fast, that they always had to spin things in a certain way. Now they don't. They take selfies and they celebrate it. And I think that's part of this sense that, let's say it's a sense that's born, in fact, of experience of all those decades of unconditional support from the U.S., but then also this increasing kind of messianism, the religious fanatics that are having growing influence within Israel. It's not just that, okay, we don't really need to be careful anymore because it's clear that God is on our side, and we can just go full steam ahead. And I think that's going to bring them down because they can't. In the end, they have gotten away, but we see how the ground is shifting in the U.S. and anger is growing around the world. They're going to take it too far. And
yeah, we'll see. I mean, I know I shouldn't hope for this, but I almost want them to take it too far, like try to strike Iran. But I think there is some realism that they have some limits. They're not completely, protected by their divine shield that they believe they have.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I think you're right. I think Netanyahu, in a way, is sort of straddles the two. He's secular. He is not a religious Jew, but he's come to see them as an important part of his, coalition. He's clearly devoted to Greater Israel, and so he's in line with them. But he has, I think, a still has a pretty good grip on reality. I mean, he's gone far, but it may be at some point where the dam breaks and somebody like Ben-Gvir actually becomes prime minister of Israel. And then it just, then we'll see the third temple and all that, that's, that could actually just bring about the end of Israel.
That's crazy. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about Mamdani. He won. How significant is that? Is this going to have a real impact?
Well, I think we'll have to see. We'll see how much of it. We have. I think all of us, to some extent or some degree or another, have been disappointed by politicians. We thought this one was going to be really different. Mamdani appears to be really different, but we'll see. I'm. There's the socialist part of Mamdani, but then there's also the foreign policy part. Now, of course, he's just the mayor. He doesn't get to provide any input into U.S. foreign policy. But if he does, but he can do things, maybe largely symbolic, but they're still important. And if he does actually show himself to be serious about his principles, that these weren't, something that he just that he used to attain office. I think it will be significant, and if it can have a transformative effect on New York City to some extent, which again is the single most important city you can say in the U.S. And it could be a harbinger of what's to come, that we have these midterm elections ahead, and others will see that, hey, he did this with this formula. Other people and others, that also have similar kind of electorates may choose a similar strategy, or those people. But let's put it this way: so we always have political opportunists, but then there are also, sincere people in politics who will say, wait a second, I never thought that I could win, but this year I think I might. And I'm going to go out and say what I think is true. And we'll see. It just maybe, if it just stops here with Mamdani, or if Mamdani turns out he tones everything down, now that he has office, now that he's in office, then it may not actually mean such. If he uses his office as some kind of megaphone to continue to express these views in unqualified terms, I think it will be significant. And if it proves that he is like just the first, he is just the beginning of a larger movement, we'll have to see.
Yeah, we've talked about how the dam has broken when it comes to Zionism and taking an anti-Israel stance. We see more and more people just going mainstream with it. I don't know who Brett Cooper is, but I guess he was somebody that's conservative that used to be on the Daily Wire, also just defending Tucker. This is just an example of just so many people. We know that most of the people on the left have already adopted an anti-Zionist position, but I'm just seeing this tidal wave happening on the right. And you can just see that the response from the Zionists, we talked before, we showed a bunch of clips, they're just becoming more and more hysterical as the support begins to just completely collapse for Israel and Zionism. Will you expect Israel and the Zionists to just behave more and more recklessly, to do something more and more drastic as they just see the bottom drop out? Because that's what's happening. It's out. And it's just a matter of time. I'm predicting within 2-3 weeks, Matt Walsh is going to take an anti-Zionist position. I'm seeing so much pressure on him. It's just a matter of time before Joe Rogan speaks publicly on it. And it's over. The dam is broken. I mean, Nick Fuentes is just so much more popular than any Zionist politician or pundit out there now. It's insane. Somebody that has been worked so hard to be relegated to the dark corners of the internet. His ideas have won out in large part. I'm not saying I agree with everything he says. I don't really know him. I just know that one interview from Tucker Carlson, and I like what he was saying about the Zionism, and his whole story, how they came after him. And it was interesting, actually, I read the Wikipedia page. They don't mention really Israel there, or like how he got there. They kind of just hide it, and they just focus on him being, a white nationalist and against LGBTQ stuff or what. This is the thing. But when you listen to his interview, he doesn't even talk about that at all. It's all about Israel and Zionism and the foreign policy stuff.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, you see, I guess you could say the legacy media has has responded to this new threat, and they respond to it in two ways. One is to kind of pretend that it's not there. I've noticed that just looking at the New York Times. There are quite a few articles and reports about Mamdani, and again, I only recently subscribed, so maybe there was something different about it early, but I don't think so. You just notice, like, you would think that there was never even this issue of Israel and Zionism in his campaign. Clearly there was, but they just decided to pretend that that doesn't even exist. I think when they understood that he was going to win, we'll just say that it never happened. This is just about socialism. That's it. So that's one approach. It's just to pretend nothing's happening and just hope it goes away. The other seems to be hysteria. And that's what we've seen, like from Mark Levine. You sent me that that post of his. It was really pretty wild. And a lot of them just seem to be losing it. Again, this is similar. It kind of echoes what I was talking about within Israel. Like Mark Levine, I don't think you would call him a religious fanatic or anything like that, but he's very much a fanatical Zionist. And it used to be, I think it's because they were so much in control, they could be kind of always present themselves as the calm, reasonable people. And it's just there are a few wild fanatics out there on the fringes. And then everybody, of course, is going to go and believe in the calm, reasonable, authoritative people. But now that the threat has become real, they are, I think they're panicking to some extent, and they've lost their cool. And then people look at them and say, geez, what's going on with these guys? And it's actually, again, they're contributing to the problem. So it does look like, yeah, I mean, it's really quite remarkable. There have been there is an awareness that there is something like a brewing civil war on the right, and it concerns Israel. And that's, again, it's something that was even unthinkable like a couple of years ago, even a year ago. So this is something that's coming fast, and it looks like they can't stop it. I mean, that's my sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I see, what was it? Vivek Ramaswamy posted something about Mamdani winning, and it said like, oh, there's two reasons why it was. It's like the number one, Republicans, we need to talk about affordability. That's the main issue. And then I forget what the second one. But ignore the fact like, hey, what about Israel and this genocide that's going on? You're right. They just ignore it. And it's a insult to all of us. Like, hey, come on. This is what's the most pressing issue of our time. Don't try to, just pivot to something else. But Israel itself, though, what do you think they will do? Will they, try to stop and shore up support and try to do some PR recovery mission, or are they going to use up what little support or control that they still have, which I shouldn't say little control, they still have lots of control. They have a lot, yeah. Yeah, what they have now before they feel like they lose it, before the anti-Zionists begin to fill in the positions of power that they currently hold. Do you think they're going to try to use it up now? Like, should we expect something within the next 6 months, from Israel?
I think we're going to, I don't know what they're going to do. Just like, I didn't know what they were going to do in Lebanon or in Iran or whatever. They had very creative and you have to say effective plans that they had worked out. It failed. To some extent, it did succeed, unfortunately, in Lebanon. You have to say ultimately it certainly failed in Iran. But as Netanyahu said, there are 8 fronts now, and the 8th is the information war. And you've seen how radical they have been on these other fronts, how reckless they have been, how they, again, have thrown caution to the winds and have, behaved very aggressively in support of this. So they understand, this is all part of greater Israel. And they know that the U.S. is critical to this greater Israel project. So they're not going to, I think, underestimate the importance of the 8th front. They are going to behave very aggressively on that front as they have behaved on the real battlefields. And I just don't know exactly what they're going to do, but I don't think it's going to work. I think it's just like that is a war that they have been losing. You can say over the last couple of years, unfortunately, they've had a lot of success on the physical battlefields. But they haven't. They have lost, on the information battlefield. And I think they will continue to lose. It's just something that they have lost control. And once they lose control, and then, the genie is out of the bottle, and there's really nothing they can do. They'll try, and they'll do what they can to suppress these voices, to smear, their rivals. And they'll have, success probably in some cases. But overall, I just don't see them winning this war. They are losing it now, and they will continue to lose it.
Mm. Yeah, obviously we talk mostly about the U.S. when it comes to Zionism. But I've been seeing some things just sort of more globally with Zionists. I mean, first of all, like the Venezuelan opposition, I should say candidate, the person in charge for the regime change, Maria Cachado, she wrote a letter to Netanyahu asking for help to overthrow Maduro. She announced that once she becomes the president of Venezuela, one of the first moves she's going to make is going to be moving the Venezuelan embassy to Jerusalem in Israel. I saw something where Israel and India have just signed some security guarantee. I don't know if you saw this before, but AIPAC was in Taiwan, and there's some Taiwanese people saying, "Oh, the Taiwanese AIPAC." I'm like, what is AIPAC? It's American Israeli, and now they're here exerting their influence in Taiwan. There was a story as well where China cracked down on this Church of Zion. It sounds like the Zionists are trying to find potential alternatives, potentially, because they know that their support within the U.S. is going down quickly. So they're trying to find other places. Do you think that there's truth to that, and there's any possibility that can succeed? It just seems to me your only hope was the United States, because this is where Christian Zionism exists.
Yeah, right. I don't think they can replace the United States. And in the end, again, Taiwan is very tightly tied to the United States, for example. Yeah, they can get support from Taiwan because the current government is very, very close with the U.S. And but if
is that changing? Is that changing now? Like I've been seeing some videos where the Kuomintang is they're being a little bit more outspoken.
Well, actually, no. That there is a real split within Taiwan, and that's something that's not reported here. We always stand with Taiwan, we stand with Ukraine, but we don't. We don't look at the real divides within those societies, and of course, I'm very familiar with those divides, through your mother and your aunts and so on. Currently it's Minjindang, it's the DPP is the ruling party in Taiwan, and they are very, they're very anti-China. They're pro-independence without actually announcing it, but everybody knows that they are. They want to establish a separate country of Taiwan. And so they're part of that. They have tied themselves very closely to, let's say, Western or U.S.-led Western hegemony, and that includes, of course, support for Ukraine. Whatever the U.S. foreign policy is, Taiwan's foreign policy will be under the Minjindang, the DPP. But there is a Kuomintang. That's the nationalist party that was headed by Chiang Kai-shek when he crossed over to Taiwan in 1949. And they are much more. They are different. They are open to negotiations with China. They're not so hostile to China. They've always had this vision of a united China. So in that way, they actually share a vision with the communists, and they are willing to talk to them. And the new leader of the KMT, the Kuomintang, is a young woman who's very impressive. And I think you actually sent me that interview. There was a German that was interviewing, and he referred to Putin as a dictator. And she said, "That's nonsense. He's not a dictator." And she was very well informed and pushed back, very firmly. It shows a different foreign policy orientation, because again, the Kuomintang doesn't want to be part of, is not so. Is not simply a part of this, again, U.S.-led Western hegemony. They do see a possible future together with China. So they have a very different view of things. And from what I hear, that when the presidential elections are held, I can't remember, is it next year or the year after, and I think in a couple of years in Taiwan, there's a good chance that the Kuomintang will come into power because the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, has become increasingly unpopular within Taiwan. So we could see a change of foreign policy there. That's a real possibility. So that's not a solution for AIPAC, for the Israelis, because again, first of all, there is a chance that there will be, a change within Taiwan where they will want to distance themselves. I don't know that it'll be a radical change, but they'll want to just put some distance between themselves and Israel and from this, the general U.S.-led Western hegemony. But then there's also, if the U.S. goes, then Taiwan, no matter what, is simply cannot replace the U.S. and won't replace the U.S. They'll just go. The reason that they have this foreign policy now is because they're just in bed with the Americans. And if the Americans cease to have this unconditional support for Zionism, even the DPP will cease to support the Zionists. So this is just no way is it going to solve their problems. They are dependent on the U.S. The Zionists are.
Yeah, there's no alternative. Well, let's just see how quickly we can get these Zionists out of the halls of power. It can't be quick enough, but I don't know. I'm hopeful. I do feel like the dam has completely broken, and once it has, I feel like the collapse should be fast. Do you think so?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it'll be fast, but I have to say that I've been somewhat taken by surprise by the extent of, really, I think like the spark was the Charlie Kirk assassination. I think it opened a lot of eyes and people started talking.
Man, that's so dark. It's so sinister.
And the revelations about where he was going shortly before his death, I think that really had a huge impact. And, it's one of those things you just can't foresee, but it's happened and it could unravel pretty quickly. Again, the Zionists do have a very firm control on the establishment, so it's not going to be easy. Even if if the right wing collapses, when it comes to support for Israel, we're not there yet. But if it does, then Zionism, you'll have to say its days are numbered in the U.S. because there has been such a huge shift against a hostility towards Israel, and it's on the left within this country already. So, if people like Netanyahu were coming to rely on Trump and MAGA, and they thought, okay, well, we got these people in the bag, and it looks like they don't.
I don't know if you saw, but Candace Owens revealed yesterday that there were 12 Israeli cell phones at the event when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Oh. And she says that the administration knows it. She dares anybody to contradict it. And she's saying that people within the administration, some people are in there that know about it, and it freaks them out that this is true. So just more and more stuff is pointing there. I think the Charlie Kirk assassination, I really think, was a huge error. If the Zionists were behind it, which obviously I think they do, or they were, Israel. Just having Bibi Netanyahu have to come out multiple times saying, "I wasn't behind that." That it's so suspicious itself. Just the fact that the story that we're being fed is just so clearly not true. It's just, I don't think anybody believes it, and the fact that they're not willing to go investigate and go further, and we're just to shut up and accept this bull BS story, I think it's been really damaging. And there's just so much now. Whether it was Epstein, or Charlie Kirk, AIPAC, all these whatever conspiracy theories, take your pick. There's one common denominator under all of them that's make people suspicious, and that's the connections with Israel. So. Yeah, I don't see how anybody can argue against it. And if you are, everybody's just posting, you got paid $7,000 for that post. Everybody's like, no rational person can come to these conclusions that Israel's great and we got to keep on supporting them to, continue this genocide for freedom or something. I don't know. it's over. It's just so over. They just messed up so much. They just done so much
I guess
evil.
I would just go to and say, yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, I wouldn't have said that even like a month ago, but maybe it is over. But it's if so, it's over in the way that the Ukraine war is over, meaning that clearly the Russians are going to win.
There's an inevitability to it.
Yeah,
but we just got to sit and wait for this pain and suffering.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of conflict, and there's many battles to be fought ahead of us.
Do you think we'll have like a Nuremberg for what's happened now? The people that are responsible for killing so many people, will they be brought to justice? Will our politicians, leaders, all these war criminals, like, will we see them? I want to see them in court. I want to see them have to admit what they did,
Right.
Will we get that pleasure? Will we be able to?
I don't know. Yeah, no, of course I would love to see that, but in the end, more than anything, I just want to see it end. If what it takes is that, okay, we make a deal and say, okay, you guys, if you just agree to go and live on this little island here and never leave it, maybe Epstein's Island or something, I don't know, then, we won't lock you up and we won't try you. But if you just go away and we can actually, sane people can take charge of these governments, I would go for that. But yeah, of course, it would be very satisfying to see them tried and locked up.
Yeah. Maybe one day. I don't know. I think everybody wants to see it. And so, like you said, I think we've won, essentially. We're talking about this war. We've essentially won, but it just, how rapidly can we get it to wrap up?
Yeah, that's a big question. It could take a while.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're part of this information war. I never really looked at it like that before. And then it was just sort of last night, I was just thinking about it. And like, maybe this is, are we getting, I feel like I'm in a war almost, they're just online participating in this, having these discussions, seeing the collapse of Zionism, lending our voice and our support to this cause. It's like, and then that's why I asked that question. Should I be framing this like I'm in a war? Because the whole point of this is I started these conversations with you because I don't want war. I want war to end.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, there's certain things you can do, even if, let's say, we are in an information war. We can try to be we should try to be civilized. We should always, reflect and be humble, realize that we too can make mistakes. And then we don't want to become vicious and engage in ad hominem attacks, as much as possible.
Unless it's Lindsey Graham or Mark Levine.
Okay, yeah, unless Lindsey Graham or Mark Levine or whatever. I don't know.
No. Or Randy Fine. No, okay, yeah, I agree. Right, you can't stoop to that level. But man, I get angry sometimes, seeing these, and I know a lot of people feel this way. And
it's only natural. You can't. You can't. Well, anger can be a motivating force and enable you to do the right thing sometimes. But it's a dangerous force. That's just sort of, you have to control it. It's it's just like anger is natural and proper in certain circumstances. If you don't feel angry about this, sometimes there's something wrong with you, but you can't let it consume you.
Maybe that's kind of how we should view our role more, as sort of just a guiding force for that anger, because I think there is this anger that's felt by millions, perhaps billions of people over these conflicts, and that can manifest into something very scary. And so I think we got to just learn how to channel that anger into some way to end this with the least amount of bloodshed, to get justice for the people that need justice. It's maybe that's the way to look at it. Don't stoke the anger.
Ride it.
Ride the anger, channel it into some real change, into education, into enlightening more and more people on what's going on.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, thanks. You're doing a great job on that, Dad. I appreciate it. Okay, we'll end it there then.
Okay, very good.
Okay, have a good rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.